Hello everyone and welcome to another video. I hope that you are very well. My name is Lizzie and we're in a new corner. I haven't filmed here before because the windows are in weird places in this room, so lighting is hard. So I think we're quite gloomy, but I'm hoping it's like cozy gloomy rather than where is she gloomy. This is also the closest video to Christmas Day. I think it's going online on the 23rd. So I'm in my Christmas jumper. I got my Christmas mug. It doesn't have tea or coffee in. It's got hot winter squash. I'm having a lovely time. And today, as we're getting closer to the end of the year, we are looking at my top non-fiction reads this year. I read a lot of non-fiction this year. I set myself a challenge at the start of the year to read at least one non-fiction book every month. And most months I read two. I think I read something like 22 or 24 non-fiction books this year, which is crazy to me. That is way more than I usually read, so I'm really glad I set myself that challenge. I'm going to continue the challenge next year, and I have made a Storygraph challenge if anyone would like to join me, as a way to track that you have read at least one non-fiction book every month. I haven't ranked these books, they're in the order that they fell off the corner of my bed in, from when I stacked them up. So we're just going to go through them. There's 6 books and 1 poetry collection. And yeah, there's a bit of variety, but also I think a bit of common theme throughout my favourite non-fiction books. I did read a wider variety of genres, but the ones that really stuck with me, that really had an impact on me, all have some similar through themes. So without any further ado, let's look at the books. First on the pile is What White People Can Do Next by Emma Dabiri. It's a very short book with, as you can see from the number of tabs, lots of things I wanted to remember. This is a really good kind of essay and is an excellent complementary piece to a lot of the anti-racism books that are often promoted and discussed, especially in the wake of George Floyd's murder. And what I really appreciated with this book is it kind of dismantled a lot of the ways that being anti-racist is discussed in a sort of neoliberal term, and was much more about systemic racism, how we can change that, but didn't also shy away from the importance of the small individual changes as well. It was very impactful and also had a really good focus on how racism and race itself is a man-made thing. It's not something, something we created and that we're suffering the consequences of, and also kind of unpacked some of that as well. So I really recommend this one. The next one is a memoir. Now, I don't usually read memoirs. It's just not something I'm usually that interested in, unless it's like a specific person. But I read 2 memoirs this year, both in March, I think. And this was one of them. It is Undivided by Vicky Beeching. The light is shining on the gold shininess. There we go. If I hold it exactly like this, you can see the cover. Vicky Beeching is a Christian. She was an evangelical worship music leader. And then she came out, and her world and her career kind of turned upside down, and this follows, well, it's her life, it's her memoirs, it's her journey with her faith, with her sexuality, with her health and her body. And this was such an impactful book for me as a queer Christian myself. It was really good to read maybe one of the most famous queer Christians, and her story and how she came to terms with it. Yes, it was. I'd been putting it off for a long time because I knew that a lot of it would hit very close to home, and it did. And I was definitely, by the time I got around to it, definitely in a place where I felt like I could read this and be okay, which I may not have been a few years ago. But it was brilliant, really brilliant, and I think it would appeal to and have new things in it for a wide range of people. Yes, I am in the middle the specific Venn diagram that Vicky Beeching is also in, but people who are in one or the other circle of the Venn diagram or outside the Venn diagram altogether, I think would find something interesting and impactful, and something to think about. There's lots to think about in terms of not just faith and equality when it comes to the LGBTQ community, and also women, but how we treat each other and how we treat those who have opinions different from ourselves, and yes, all sorts in there. Brilliant, really, really recommend. Now, not all of the books in this list were 5-star reads for me. I think especially with non-fiction, then the way I rate it doesn't necessarily correlate with the impact it had on me. With fiction, then if something was really impactful and really moved me, you know, that is pretty much automatically a 5-star read unless in exceptional circumstances. In non-fiction, sometimes there are flaws within the book, things that you wish that there were there, or things that just are slightly outdated now because of the nature of non-fiction writing. And so you give it a 4-star rating, but it can still stick with you and affect how you think and approach things. And this next book comes into that category. It is Weapons of Math Destruction by Cathy O'Neill. If the title alone wasn't enough to persuade you to read this book, it's really, really great. This is a book about algorithms and how algorithms perpetuate the inequality in our society. We often think of computers and algorithms and science as being a very non-biased, external, uninfluenced by human error thing. And often the opposite is true, because who wrote the algorithm? Who designed the software? A human being. And that person's flaws are in the software and in the algorithm. Say that you write an algorithm that is going to predict who commits crimes or where crimes are committed. And lots of police organisations in the USA use algorithms like this. I can't speak for the UK. This book is about the USA specifically. I'm sure that police departments around the world also use them. So that algorithm would take into account, you know, you would put in things like, have people committed crimes before? Has the area been a high crime area? But that doesn't account for the fact that some areas are over-policed, that some people are more likely to be arrested for a crime than other people are with the same crime due to race, class, etc. And so this book is about how those algorithms kind of double down on those inequalities that we sort of accidentally program in. The reason I gave it 4 stars rather than 5, there were 2 things. The first one was that there was very little kind of proposed solution. The only sort of optimistic point was that she was like, I guess credit ratings are okay because they are purely based on your own financial history, which, you know, makes sense. Even if I wish credit ratings took into account rent, but, you know, that's a whole other gripe of mine. And the other thing was just partly because of when it was written. This was written after the 2016 election or during 2016, but before the Cambridge Analytica scandal. So the section on social media felt very, very incorrect. As I was reading it, I was going, I know for a fact that all of this has changed since you wrote this book, and it's not her fault. It's just how it goes with the subject matter, especially science and computers, which are evolving all the time. So it was a 4-star read for me, but was very, very impactful and has influenced the way that I think about this sort of thing and that I treat this kind of thing, I guess. Not that it really comes up in my day-to-day life very much, but I think just an awareness of it is really, really good. Next up, I've got a poetry collection, and that is Running Upon the Wires by Kay Tempest. This is the first Kay Tempest I've read. I've got one of their other books that I bought over the summer in a secondhand shop, and I really, really want to read next year. But this is a little poetry collection, and I don't read a huge amount of poetry. I read probably a couple of collections, 2 or 3 collections every year. And I really like when a poetry collection has a narrative, when there is kind of a story being told throughout the collection, or sort of an evolution of something happening. And that is what this book provided. So the kind of narrative of the story is that the narrator, the person who these stories are from the perspective of, it starts off with a breakup, so the end, and then the kind of moving on, the middle, and then the start of a new relationship at the beginning. And it was just really, really a clever idea, a clever approach, and beautifully written poems. One of the lines that I tabbed, that I sort of starred by, is in the poem, "I don't want to go backwards with her anymore, I want to go forwards with you." And it's the last two lines. "I'm learning to recognise each pitch in the scale of your silence." Beautifully written. Just a really, really lovely collection, and also very reflective on when you do end one relationship and start another, how sometimes you kind of spot patterns in yourself, and sometimes you're in denial about those patterns in yourself, and that's a kind of running theme throughout as well. But it's all sort of very undercurrenty, like, you know, you kind of, you're side-eyeing it but going, well, I'll deal with that later. I did say there would be a theme. Strong Female Lead by Awa Madawi. I loved this book. It was so great. I had such a good time reading it. It was really funny and well written and very engaging. It didn't feel like, it's clearly well researched and from a place of expertise, but it never felt like a slog to read, you know? We've got our subtitle, Lessons from Women in Power. And the book is about how often the personality traits and the qualities that we code as being feminine, so not things that are female or male, but that we as society have decided are female or male, often the things coded as feminine are better qualities for leadership than the things coded as masculine. But we kind of, as a society, believe the opposite. So we vote for confidence and blusteriness and strong individualism and wanting to go against the grain and be your own person. But what we need, the people who, you know, tend to be the better leaders, are people who are good as working at a team, at nurturing and considering other people and putting people's health and well-being at the centre. That those people tend to be better leaders, and they tend to be women because we are socialised to have those traits. That's one of the things I really appreciated about this book, is how it was very clear that we are socialised to have these traits. They're not inherent to men or women, and as we know, gender is a much more fluid thing than it's often presented as. There were some really lovely nuggets in this. It was really, really well presented, had loads and loads of interesting things, but never felt overwhelming. It was just a joy to read. I think if I had to pick a favourite of the books in this video, I don't know, yeah, I think this might be it. This is probably it. And the last one in this stack of best non-fiction books is Jane Austen, The Secret Radical by Helena Kelly. And this is another one that I gave 4 stars, partly because I've discovered this year a pet peeve I didn't know I had, is in non-fiction when they have fictional passages in between the chapters. I'm not a fan. I am not a fan. There is so much interesting stuff packed into this book. It was such an interesting read. So many things that I didn't know about, that I never thought about, that changed the way I read and think about Jane Austen books, that changed the way I think about British history and how that has affected the British present. What I will say, the reason I gave it 4 stars, and I think the title, I feel like the author, she came up with the title and the concept, and you can tell she wants to shock you. At the very start, in the introduction, she's saying, you know, if you're not open to these ideas, don't read the book. And there were a few outlandish things. There were a few things that were not outlandish, but were presented as such. So I think there was definitely a sense of she wants to be groundbreaking and radical and kind of get a few people clutching at their pearls. And I think she succeeded. judging by the response when I asked in Jane Austen Facebook groups if people had read this. Very mixed responses. But there is a lot of really interesting stuff in here. Some of it was about the politics of Jane Austen's time, so the Napoleonic Wars, the transatlantic slave trade. Some of it was about the social aspects, so attitudes towards intimacy, for example. And it was all tied into a specific Jane Austen book. This is another thing that I kind of wasn't 100% on, is how it was presented, that every kind of issue was tied to a specific book, and I don't think that was necessarily the best way of presenting it. So the things that knocked this book from 5 to 4 stars were much more about the way it was written and how it was put together and presented, rather than the content itself, because the content itself was really, really interesting, fascinating, flipped a lot of ideas on their heads, and also, you know, I think especially with books like Mansfield Park and to an extent Sanditon, then we can't ignore the fact that politics are very present in Jane Austen's writing. We just often choose not to see them. And I'm very sorry that that was interrupted by a police car driving past the window. So those are my best non-fiction books of 2022. Let me know what your best non-fiction books were this year, if you have any to recommend me. As I said, I'll be doing my non-fiction challenge next year as well, so always looking for some to add to the TBR. And if you enjoyed this video, next week I will be giving you my best fiction books of 2022, so make sure you subscribe for that. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time. Ta-ra for now.